Hey everyone, with the Edge of Fate, we got 3 new armor exotics, 3 new weapon exotics. We're going to be testing almost all of them for boss DPS. Let's go ahead and check out the outline here. What are we going to be talking about today? So first slide, we're going to be going over some primaries. So third iteration, that's kind of like the boss DPS question mark that people have been talking about, because obviously it was quite strong with the anti-barrier scout bug at the start of the season. We're also going to slide Graviton Spike into this slide. Now, I know a lot of you are probably not wondering how good is Graviton Spike for boss DPS, because, you know, it's probably not very good, but I'm still going to include it in this slide. I just didn't give it its own slide, basically. That's why I put a little asterisk there, because we're also going to talk about it in that slide in the context of primaries. Next, we're going to talk about New Land Beyond. Now, you might be surprised to see New Land Beyond here, and that's because it got a new catalyst with this season, so technically not a new weapon, but the fact that you can shoot it basically indefinitely as long as you have 20 stacks without reloading, pretty helpful. You might be wondering, you know, does this make it better for DPS? Does it make it a stronger contender? We're going to go over that topic when we reach that slide. Third, we're going to talk about Whirling Ovation, new raid exotic. A lot of creators and a lot of testers actually don't have this exotic because it's a random drop, and obviously this contest was pretty grueling. I do have the exotic, so I was able to test it. I'll definitely go over it, maybe talk about its use in rotations and stuff like that. And then fourth, when it comes to armor, we're going to start talking about Eunoia. That's the Hellion exotic that splits it up into multiple projectiles. This is pre-buff, obviously in Ashen Iron. I believe it's getting a damage buff and a tracking buff. In terms of damage, I'm just going to compare it to normal Hellion and talk about how much it increases your overall DPS. And then we're going to talk about Melas Panoplia, which is of course the Hammer Recall exotic with melee stacking buffs and stuff like that. Compare it to normal like Syntho Hammer. And then finally, we're going to just have a little summary, a little overview over the important stuff in this video. If you want to skip the deets, just head right to the summary at the end of the video for just the, the basics of what we're finding today. Okay, and then in terms of armor exotics, we're not going to talk about Moirai. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Moirai, because it's Whirling Maelstrom DPS. I mean, it's not particularly different from normal Whirling Maelstrom, and I could test Whirling Maelstrom for damage at some point, but it's not. Strand Hunter is not the most relevant subclass for endgame PvE or for DPS outside of like the starter Silk Strike stuff that's happening right now, which you can obviously do on Prismatic as well. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to our first slide, which is going to be third iteration. Now, third iteration, cool little slide layout here. We're comparing it to some classic primaries, kind of benchmarks. But first, let's talk about the two third iteration kind of variants that I have on here. So third iteration kind of reminds me of Touch of Malice for boss DPS, in that if you're going to use it in a fire team that's coordinated, you're probably going to have one guy that's going to be spamming the Blight in order to make sure that everybody else's damage is going to be as high as possible, while everybody else is just spamming the normal mode because they don't need to worry about marking the target. Now, third iteration, kind of the same way. I have my orange row here, which kind of assumes you're solo or you're the marking person. It's the amalgamation round into 15 mark shots into a manual reload with high reload. And then the top row here is going to be if you're just a normal fire team member, you don't worry about marking, you're just spamming those marked shots. And you can see here the third iteration lies somewhere in the range of 900 to 1000 DPS with standard Wells, Surges, Tractor. Okay, no seasonal stuff, no new gear, anything like that. Now, is that good? Is 900 to 1000 DPS good in the world of primaries? And if you look slightly below this, we have Outbreak Perfected, Max Nanite Start, 2500 damage, 174% increase in DPS. Now, this does say Max Nanite Start. If you're not in a fire team and you start with 0 nanites, Outbreak's damage is going to be reduced rather significantly. You can check in the Sustain tab of my spreadsheet. You can see where the Outbreak row is. But it's not going to be enough to make it a big difference against third iteration. It is still by far a much better weapon for DPS than third iteration, even when you start at 0 nanites. The same can be said for Teraba with Ravenous Beast active and Peacekeepers, another pretty common option for primary DPS that you might see these days. 2300 damage, Antidate is somewhere around here too, 2000 to 2500 range. This is where you really want to be hitting to be a good primary for DPS. And now, even when you account for the fact that this thing is a scout rifle and you play to its strengths, it's still not very good for boss damage. I would say it's pretty bad for boss damage, actually. And I know people were going crazy with it, with the anti-barrier scout bug earlier this season, but now that that's gone and dust has settled, I mean, for DPS at least, not a very good weapon. So we're going to leave it off the table. And then Graviton Spike, I mean, to nobody's surprise, 620 DPS, 32% worse than third iteration, which we've already established is not a very good boss damage option. Graviton Spike, this doesn't include many crystal shatters in the testing because I tested on Templar, and Templar is kind of thin toward the bottom and floating, so the crystals don't really do a lot of damage. But even if you added optimal crystals, a lot of crystals hitting here, the damage, the meter wouldn't move too much, right? This is not going to become a meta weapon. And I didn't test it with Lucky Pants because it's a lowish fire rate hand cannon. and it doesn't really make sense to test it with Lucky Pants. And the majority of your damage is coming from like the splash effects, and compared to a normal hand cannon at least, right? So Graviton Spike, to nobody's surprise, probably not very good for boss damage. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Special weapons. We're going to talk about New Land Beyond. Now, New Land Beyond, like I mentioned, new catalyst. Once you hit the master times 20, you can just shoot indefinitely. You don't need to worry about reloading. So how does that actually matter for DPS? So let's have our baseline here in the orange row. This assumes you're starting at the master times 0. You've just switched to New Land Beyond. Maybe you died, respawned, or you didn't get any stacks, right? You start at 0, and for the first 2 mags, 8, 16, you need to do manual reloads, and then after that, you get the benefit of just being able to shoot indefinitely, right? With this level of DPS, with this level of planning, of encounter setup, you do 2700 DPS, which is pretty solid. That's above stuff like Outbreak. Pretty decent, right? Now, when you account for the fact that you might be starting at the master times 20 and you get ammo afterward and you're sprint canceling as well, and you have stuff like Rally Barricade, so basically the perfect scenario to do damage with New Land Beyond, the DPS jumps to 3400. Now, 3400, let's compare that to some other stuff that's pretty meta these days. You have Lord of Wolves, 4700 damage. Obviously, it's a shotgun, so you got to be close range. This assumes perfect crits as well, and ignition damage with hip firing, perfect crits, right? And Lord of Wolves punish a lot when you miss crits, right? So don't assume your damage is going to look like, your DPS is going to look this perfect. But let's say it is 4,700, 72% above the master's baseline, above New Land Beyond at 0 stacks, right? So that is a lot more. That is a lot more. 72% for a special weapon difference is a lot more. But we're talking about Lord of Wolves here. And Lord of Wolves is, I believe, still currently the highest special weapon DPS you can do in this game, at least if we're ignoring seasonal stuff like Temporal Blast. So not bad, honestly, right? And the total damage, I mean, look at that, 163, 152,000. I mean, if you look at my spreadsheet right now, go to the sustain tab, check out the total damage column, EOF total, and just take a look, and you'll see there is nothing in the special weapon department that comes anywhere close to hitting 150, 163,000 total damage. So New Land Beyond, definitely a standout in that regard. And I think a lot of people, for example, in Contest Desert Perpetual and going forward, have definitely turned their sights on New Land Beyond as a pretty strong weapon when it comes to total damage. And the fact that it does pretty decent DPS too, I mean, like, compared to some of these bottom options here, right? Like Mint Retrograde with Rewind Honing ×5, one of the strongest special weapons this season. It's only 30% higher than the baseline, and it's almost identical to New Land Beyond when you're sprint canceling and you start with the master times 20. So really impressive stuff. And then Still Hunt with Celestial Nighthawk and a pre-pop, 3,300, 3,400 DPS. So New Land Beyond with the master times 20 and sprint canceling, right, with no Nighthawk or anything needed, was already hitting higher DPS with over double the total damage of Still Hunt with Celestial Nighthawk. I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive in my opinion. Obviously, the Still Hunt Celestial Nighthawk entry does manual reloads, no orb support, pre-pop start, stuff like that. So just if you're using both weapons, just, Still Hunt with Celestial Nighthawk on, just kind of in a normal scenario. I mean, New Land Beyond's pretty impressive. Look at this damage profile. It's pretty impressive, right? So pretty cool stuff there. Shout out the New Land Beyond Catalyst. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and move on. We got Whirling Ovation next. Beautiful green slide here. I just have kind of like 5 little tiles here that kind of go over the basic stats of Whirling Ovation. We're just going to talk about it. So first up, we got pre-charge swap DPS. So this is like if you're holding out the gun and a boss is about to become damageable and you're holding left click and you let go the instant the boss becomes damageable, the swap DPS of that, and then just instantly swapping to another weapon, is going to be 24,250. Now, swap DPS is really, frame time dependent, human kind of execution dependent. Over a very small period of time, it's not really a relevant stat, but it is 21% higher than Parasite. Now, this is literally just like because you can, swap off the weapon really quickly and it just does a lot of burst damage. Like, it's not really a relevant stat, to be honest with you. So don't put too much stock into this stat. The other stuff here is going to be more important. So the second tile, we have max anticipation swap DPS. So this is basically saying if you're using this rocket in a damage rotation and you do enough damage with your special weapons and whatever in order to build up its meter fully, and then you swap to it, you instantly start charging, and frame perfect, you let go of the rocket the second the meter fills up, and then you instantly swap off the rocket again. What's the swap DPS? Well, the answer is 4,700, which is not that good. It's not that good. Parasite at 0 stacks. Let's say you're using a holster rotation, right? Parasite at 0 stacks. You swap from a special weapon to Parasite, bam, you shoot the worm, you swap back. In that moment where you swap to Parasite, the DPS is actually higher than Whirling Ovation by a fair amount. Whirling Ovation is 29% worse than Parasite in this regard, and this is generally where people are thinking about using this rocket, right? So really, I think this rocket right now, unless it gets buffed, unless it gets a catalyst, the only really claim to fame it can have is that obviously it doesn't need holsters like Parasite, which is kind of nice, I suppose. It's a high quality of life weapon. You never need to reload it. But the only really thing where it's like class leading is if you want to start damage with Whirling Ovation with a rocket right off the rip, and you don't want to ever swap back to Whirling Ovation because the boss is going to be dead already, like maybe in a speed run or something. 3-4 seconds, you pre-charge it, bang, you swap off, boom, you're instantly done, right? So that's kind of where I think this weapon might come into play. Unfortunately, the numbers just aren't there for the other tiles. I mean, let's talk about some of this other stuff. No anticipation swap DPS. It's around 2100. This is basically if you don't charge it at all with any special weapons or anything, and you just swap to it and you full charge it and you let go. 2113, similar to Final Warning Burst, really not that great when it comes to DPS. And then let's say you use this thing for sustained DPS, right? So you start with a max anticipation meter and then you just recharge it over and over again. The DPS is similar to Blighted Touch of Malice, which is like already not a class leading primary. So really, sustained DPS, not looking good. No anticipation swap DPS, not looking good. And then if you're going to use it with special weapons like Mint Retrograde, it's fine, but Parasite swapping with Mint Retrograde is going to be better, especially if you can use a Surge exotic like Foe Tracer or Sanguine, right? So, not that great, not that great. And then total damage-wise, it's 81.6k, which is similar to Body Shot Legend of Acreus, which is definitely not bad, right? It's definitely not bad, especially considering it's a ranged option unlike Acreus. But 81.6k, it's like Parasite, I believe, is higher than this if I'm not mistaken, or similar. I think Parasite's like 88k or something like that. So, in my opinion, you know, just go for the Parasite swapping, to be honest with you. You know, Parasite is better on bosses like Atrax, for example, like Whirling Ovation. People have tested on Atrax. Not very good. Not for whatever reason. Just not very good. Just doesn't do like enough damage to her health bar. Atrax is weird, but you know what I mean. Just not very good for some reason. Yeah, I mean, even for swap rotations, Parasite's Worm byproduct boosts special weapon damage by 15%. This weapon doesn't really have any passive effect like that, which is going to increase your damage overall. So, in my opinion, Whirling Ovation doesn't really have a space in the sandbox right now, but we'll see what happens. We'll see if it gets a catalyst. All right, moving on to our armor, we have Eunoia. Beautiful damage profile slide here, I must say. You know, it's a little bit of self-glaze. So base Hellion DPS, for those who are not aware, is around 412, right? 412 assumes you're getting all the ignitions, so none of your teammates are stealing your ignitions, all you. With Ember of Ashes, the DPS goes up by around 13%. And then Eunoia DPS, raw DPS, is going to be 547, goes up by around 9% with Ember of Ashes. Okay, now some of this Ember of Ashes stuff and the DPS could be testing variability. Eunoia, you know, the Seekers of the like little solar Seekers that come out, little RNG, right? Little RNG. Templar, his body shape is pretty good for Eunoia, to be honest, right? The 4 projectiles, most of them usually hit him when I was testing, right? So not a bad boss to kind of get a good idea of maybe what the tracking will be like post-buff. But let's just go over the raw numbers here, right? So let's look at it right here. 33% increase versus normal Hellion on a mostly optimal target. On a target that is significantly maybe smaller or significantly maybe shorter than Templar and not floating, you might have less success with Eunoia and see less damage overall. Now, the raw damage gain between Eunoia versus normal Hellion is going to be 134 DPS, which is, if you account for the fact that most people, when they're doing DPS, it's around 3,000, right? 3,000 is New Land Beyond, Opaque Hourglass, Thunderlord, Sleeper, you know, classic DPS options. 3,000 DPS. This is a 4.5% increase to your overall DPS. Now, compare that to something like Sanguine or Apotheosis Veil, and really, you're not really looking at a really competitive damage exotic here. Sanguine is guaranteed 10% with no boss RNG. No need to worry about ignitions or anything like that, just raw 10% increase. And Apotheosis, obviously, you can spam, you know, Touch of Flame Solar Nades, Touch of Flame Fusion Nades, what have you, and you can benefit your teammates as well. So, and you can have like stuff like Assembler as well, you know, tons of exotics that are probably better for damage than Eunoia, at least at this time. We will definitely test it after it gets buffed and see what happens with that. Now, the DPS of other tick sources you see in the bottom here, Arc Soul, this is just for reference, right? Arc Soul, 130 DPS, right? So Hellion definitely a bit higher than that. Area Denial with Honing ×5, that's going to be 575 DPS, you know, pretty similar to Eunoia DPS. And then finally, we have a heavy weapon that's sort of a tick source, 980 DPS from Finality's Augur with bait and switch on a marked target. So yeah, typically, like I said, 4.5% DPS increase for most damage options, so like New Land Beyond, Opaque, Thunderlord, etc. And I think that's just not really worth it. That's just not really worth it, especially when you have other people that might be trying to do ignition-based damage, whether it's Dragon's Breath or another Hellion on your team, etc. So just not that great. Not that great. Not particularly amazing. When it gets buffed in Ash and Iron, we'll revisit it. Maybe it'll be okay by then. I know a lot of you guys have been commenting, asking me, hey, Aegis, I know you use your Eunoia and your 5 feet flawless. Like, why did you do that? It's not because I like Eunoia or because it's very strong or anything. It was literally because I needed an exotic that had high class stat, and I was the only warlock on my team, I think. So I needed to farm well pretty fast. And so I had Hellion on for singeing procs and stuff like that. And Eunoia was one of the only exotics at the time that I had a class stat spike, so that I could have high class stats so I can get my Phoenix die faster for Dynamo, distribution procs, etc. So I can get my well faster for my teammates. So yeah, with that out of the way, I mean, you know, Eunoia is not particularly remarkable, as we've seen here mathematically. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to Melas Panoplia. Melas Panoplia, little damage profile here. Much shorter summary on this one. So number one is Melas Panoplia. Both hammer directions, I guess you can call it, when you throw it out and when you recall it. Both of these stack with 1-2 punch, Roaring Flames, other melee buffs like this. So now that you have this information, let's compare it with Roaring Flames and 1-2 punch. So for reference here, I'll show a clip on screen, right? You can shoot your shotgun, throw the hammer out, shoot your shotgun again, get the hammer back, and 1-2 punch will apply to both of the hammers. And so how good is this, right? What's the DPS? The DPS is 2,159. So if you're paying attention to the previous slides, that's not very good, right? That's similar to Teraba with Ravenous Beast and Peacekeepers. That's not amazing, right? So now the direct comparison would be, everybody has been asking, is what about Biotic throwing hammers, right? What about 1-2 punching with just spamming the baby hammer over and over with Biotic and Roaring Flames and 1-2 punch? 4,200 DPS, so it's not even close. It's not even close. Now you could theoretically maybe stack some other melee buffs with Melas Panoplia, but you could say the same about Biotic, right? They have the same buffs here, and 4,200. It's not even close. It's not even close. So moving on, conclusion. This is a power fantasy exotic. You know, in my opinion, it plays too slow for endgame content. The hammer just takes too long to throw out and come back, even if you do like perfect recalls and stuff. So it's not that great. Not really suitable for boss damage, especially even with recall timings and you doing 1-2 punch both ways, out and in. All right, so that is the bulk of the information. Let's go for a little summary here. Right, number one, primary weapons, third iteration, meh. Graviton Spike, I don't think anyone was expecting it to be good for boss damage, but even when you're considering the fact that third iteration is a scout rifle, there are 20 better primaries out there for damage. Probably in the next video, actually, we're going to go over what the primary weapon meta is. So yeah, I mean, it's just not good for damage. Okay. Special weapons, New Land Beyond kind of surprised me. Very solid DPS when optimized. Pretty decent DPS, even if you don't optimize. And the total damage, I mean, come on, the total damage. 150k, 160k. I mean, that is just absurd for the current sandbox, right? Most special weapons, even good special weapons with 4 times a charm and whatever, are hitting 80k, 90k, 150k, 160k total damage. Absurd, right? Power weapons here, pretty overrated when it comes to Whirling Ovation. I didn't really write Whirling Ovation here, but just to be clear, you can see it in the background. Whirling Ovation, I think, pretty overrated by a lot of people. It's, I could see it being used for like some solo stuff, right? Like, I think it was used for Explicator. Makes sense to use it there, right? A Parasites with times 20's worth of damage, basically. By the way, it does slightly less damage than Parasite at times 20. I know a lot of people in my chat were saying that like it does slightly more. It actually does slightly less, right? But they're pretty similar. They're pretty similar. You can basically consider it like having a long charge time in exchange for having a Parasite times 20 worth of damage, right? But I do think it's pretty overrated. For rotation stuff, just go with Parasite. Just go with Parasite. And in burst stuff, Parasite seems to be more compatible with the burst bosses that are relevant, like Atrax. So I don't really think it has much of a space in the sandbox right now. And then for points 4 and 5, we got Eunoia. Not great. We're going to revisit in Ash of Iron, 4.5% approximate increase when it comes to like 3,000 DPS, rotation strategies or whatever it is. And then Melas Panoplia, just do regular 1-2 punch hammer. And also, by the way, this is maybe a good opportunity for me to point out, regular 1-2 punch hammer DPS is pretty good. It's pretty good. You just need 1-2 punch Biotic Roaring. Pretty easy to maintain. Biotic, you just got to be surrounded. Pretty chill. And then Roaring Flames last 20 seconds, right? So you can just throw a nade during damage, really chill. And the DPS is like 4,200. It's like 4,200. I mean, that's really good. That's pretty good, compared to some of the other stuff that we have in the sandbox right now. 4,200 is like A tier damage, right? So pretty good stuff. Yeah, I hope this answered any of your questions you might have had about any of the new Edge of Fate exotics, whether we're talking weapons, armor for DPS, Yeah, not crazy like meta changes from any of these. I mean, New Land Beyond has just become better. It's not even a new exotic. I just wanted to talk about it because the catalyst and the exotics, the armor exotics at least, like we thought they were going to be during the previews, not anything to write home about, at least when it comes to boss damage. So yeah, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think tomorrow's video is going to be going over the state of primary DPS in the current sandbox with, you know, Antidate and, you know, a couple new primaries, you know. We're going to talk about that. So yeah, I'll see you guys then, and have a wonderful day.